Leaders, you want to give a good speech? You're not going to want to miss today's show, right now on the Leadership Voice. Welcome to the Leadership Voice. I'm your host, Jay Barbuto. Today's show features crafting and delivering the right message, and we have 3 expert guests that will help us get there. The Leadership Voice welcomes Jay Golden, Jill Wesley, and Barbara Seymour Giordano. We also have a special leadership lesson today being delivered by Professor Jay Barbuto. Oh, wait, that's me. Well, let's start things off with today's quote of the day. Today's quote comes from Ethos 3, Empowering Presenters. Stories constitute the single most powerful weapon in a leader's arsenal. That was Harvard University professor Howard Gardner. Our first guest today on the Leadership Voice is Jay Golden. Jay Golden is an author, story coach, and founder of Retellable, a storytelling company based in Ashland, Oregon. After 12 years of chasing the edge of media content with a handful of startups, Jay realized that the most overlooked opportunity was not out at the edge, but back in the center. The stories told and retold person to person. Since then, Jay has helped leaders at companies such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, BMW, and Rainforest Action Network to find and shape the most essential stories. His new book, Retellable: How Essential Stories Unlock Power and Purpose, offers a universal storytelling framework to help leaders transform their critical insights into valuable stories in order to inform and guide audiences large and small. We at the Leadership Voice are pleased to welcome our first guest today, Chief Storyteller, Jay Golden.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Jay, it's great to have you on the show today. And our viewers are probably dying to find out, how did you get involved in the story space?
Well, I came up from doing a lot of digital media for years and years, as you described, and I had this moment where I had been serving these certain clients, big clients doing very, very powerful work, a lot of social change work, a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of alternative energy work. And they were all coming to us to create these videos that would travel far and be seen by many people, animations, different videos that would tell their stories. And I realized that the people that were coming to us were in fact incredibly powerful storytellers. And yet they were saying, please make this video, please make this media that will travel across the world. And I kept looking back at them and saying, what about the stories that you have to tell? What about the 99% of moments that you're out in the world and your stories need to be told? And I made a turn, and I turned to more analog, the analog world of storytelling to help these leaders find their own stories.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And so, in essence, you helped people understand that when the power of the story can be so much more impactful than just the numbers or the decisions.
That's right. The facts and the data are absolutely essential, but they're not the things that we remember. The things that we remember are those critical changes, those insights, those moments, those true transformations that the stories deliver, and they've delivered them since the beginning of human civilization.
So you started out and you moved into the space of storytelling, and you've helped many leaders craft their stories and develop catalogs of stories. Can you talk about some of the hurdles you've had to overcome along the way?
Yeah, one big challenge was actually communicating with clarity what a story is. The idea that a story isn't just what happened yesterday or the thing that you say. A story is very specific. It's a journey with a twist. It's a problem approached in an interesting way that makes us care. It's a big change. And helping people to truly understand what a story is and how to find theirs, these were big hurdles.
If you could share your approach or your philosophy of storytelling, that would be great for our viewers.
I believe that the key is not just all of the things that we say and those great messages. The key is when people wake up tomorrow after they've heard what you've had to say, after all the 1,000 bits and bytes of information that they've heard in that day before, they're having a sip of coffee, and what is it that they will remember, and what is it that they will actually take forward into the day? And that's what stories do, and that's what I help my clients and help the audiences I work with to find their essential insights and their lessons and bring them so they'll be remembered.
No, I think a lot of leaders could really benefit from focusing more on their stories and developing their catalog of stories. So if you were talking to a CEO and you had just a moment to give a CEO a tip, something that they could put into practice immediately.
Okay, so let's say we just have 5 minutes. They're about to go on stage, or they're preparing for their talk. It's a founder or a CEO or a prominent speaker, and they come to me and they say, okay, look, I've got this story and I want to hear what you have to say. A lot of times what I find is that these stories are very powerful, they're very well told, and the audience really, really loves them. They come up to them and say, hey, this is terrific, your story is so amazing. But deep down inside, that founder or CEO feels like that story's been told so many times that it's now calcified. It's a little bit like it's a little cardboard. And so what I would say to them is go into that story. Look again at it. Look at it from different angles. Explore, are there moments in time which you can bring alive in a way that you didn't do before? Is there a change that's different? Is there something for this particular audience that truly would offer them a transformation? So you go back into that story and you bring it to life and you deliver it in a different way.
And then that story ends up really illuminating and impacting everyone around that much more.
That's right, and that speaker gets a new gift, which is life into their story, which they didn't have before.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a great way to close out our interview. Jay, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.
Our guests have really benefited from having you here and to share your wisdom. We're going to have lots of leaders watching this show, and they'll get lots of pearls of wisdom. You'll stay on and join us for the Q&A coming up in just a few minutes.
My
That's
pleasure.
Great. So now it's time for a featured segment on the Leadership Voice. It's today's Did You Know? Today's Did You Know comes from Business Online. A recent study by Quantified Communications found that those public presentations driven by stories ended up 35% more persuasive and 21% more memorable than all other presentations. Which means, leaders, when you plan your public speeches, it's the story, not the statistic, that will leave the biggest impression. It's now time for our Leadership Countdown, where we give you, our viewers, a useful list of strategies that will help you develop as a leader. Today's Leadership Countdown comes from the New York Times, as we bring you the 5 tips for telling better stories. Number 1, keep it simple. Number 2, openings and closings are most important. The beginning and end is what people will really remember best. So your strongest messages should always be up front or in the closing moments. The number 3 tip for good storytelling is to be mindful of your story's spine. Focus on the main parts of your story and beware of tangents. Stories that drift too far astray may lose your audience's attention. Number 4, don't alienate your audience. Keeping your story relevant will draw in listeners and help your message be heard. And finally, our 5th tip for telling better stories is tell the truth. Leaders must be transparent and authentic, and nothing will destroy this more decisively than a lie. And that, viewers, has been your Leadership Countdown. Follow these 5 tips, and you too can tell great stories. Stick around, we have Jill Wesley in the studio, and we'll be right back after this commercial break.
Well, we found here at Honda Center and Anaheim Ducks that the Center for Leadership brings expertise in doing research, in doing training. The faculty that has come and given the training to our employees does all the research themselves. They're not pulling this information off the shelf. They're out there researching themselves, talking from firsthand experience, and it brings such a level of competency that we, again, don't find from other trainers that are on the market.
Well, simply put, is what really differentiates and distinguishes Fullerton and the Center for Leadership, really is your expertise. You guys are able to create customized content for our business based on true research.
The faculty from Cal State Fullerton, obviously they're professors of their field, they have deep knowledge and research, but also, aside from the theory, they really bring in some practical examples, and they bring in a lot of interactive activities.
The Bringing Learning to Work initiative is our way of meeting the needs of Orange County businesses and communities. When our clients ask the Center for Leadership to come to bring learning to work, the clients know that they're getting cutting-edge information, the latest thinking in the field, but they're also getting world-class training. Welcome back to The Leadership Voice. Our next guest today on The Leadership Voice is Jill Wesley. Jill Wesley is known as the Pro Speaker Coach. In her 25-year career, she has trained and coached over 80,000 executives and high-performing employees in some of the world's top companies and institutions, including Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, Square, Stanford Law School, Johns Hopkins University, the NFL Players Association, and Panasonic. She has coached Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists, award-winning filmmakers, and world-famous scientists. She loves helping leaders developing their thought leadership and speak with authenticity. As a speaker, she has delivered more than 300 keynotes in all 50 states and in 25 different countries. Jill has been the secret weapon for leaders and entrepreneurs who give major keynotes on massive stages. She's the speaker coach for TEDx San Francisco, and her client talks have been viewed by millions. She's the author of TEDx Prep Kit, and her passion is helping leaders ignite a movement to change the world through TEDx talks and keynotes. She offers private coaching and group programs for clients who want to leave a legacy. Her website is prospeakercoach.com. Please welcome Jill Wesley.
Hi.
Jill, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Our executives and our folks that are going to be giving big speeches in their lives are going to greatly benefit from hearing your pearls of wisdom.
Well, my journey was interesting. I started out I taught business English to executives. And it was a plan I had, a master plan to travel the world and then teach business English. And as I partnered with different senior executives, I noticed that they had to give global presentations. They would have to speak on really major stages. And so I started coaching them for their press conferences and coaching them for those types of events. And then when I returned to the States, I decided this is something I'm really called to do. I really love it. And so the past 25 years or so, I've been partnering with leaders in a variety of fields, coaching them to really show up authentically and lead their organizations or share their research with the world.
And then one by one, your client base began to grow and grow, and now here we are today, one of the most well-known TEDx coaches in San Francisco.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. TEDx San Francisco is a phenomenal event. I feel really grateful and honored to be part of it.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. And you also worked with some great clients. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what is your philosophy of giving a great speech?
My philosophy about giving a great speech is you have to show up. And by showing up, I have a philosophy in terms of how I actually coach people. So I call it the science and soul of speaking. Mm-hmm. The science piece is putting together a talk that has the right construction, that your messaging is clear, that you're doing audience analysis, you're doing all the nuts and bolts. I also weave in neuroscience and psychology. So that's the science part. The soul part is helping somebody really show up authentically and be themselves. So soul means a lot of things to different people. Some people, soul means they're, what really makes them tick. Some people see it as an energy. Some people see it as they think of soul and they think of James Brown. I don't care what their reference point is. I want them to show up where they have the right presence and their humor, their warmth, their connection really shows up.
Could you maybe talk a little bit about where that philosophy came from?
My philosophy around the science and soul came from sitting through hundreds of presentations, people who were really warm and engaging one-on-one. So if we were seated eating lunch, they were fantastic,
Like
talking
this.
just like this. And then they would get up on stage, and what I say is it's like the soul was sucked out of them. All of a sudden they just got up and they looked, there was no animation, there was no connection, and the audience desperately needs that. Regardless of how technical or complex the message is or the content is, we have to actually show up as human beings. So that's where the philosophy came from. I would just sit there and watch people present and think, where are they? So one of the great things about my work is I get to find them in their own talks.
Oh, that's wonderful. So if you had a moment with somebody, they were about to give a real high-stakes speech, could be an executive, could be a scientist, could be a world expert, but they're about to give a high-stakes speech and you have just a couple of moments to give them some advice. What advice would you give them?
The advice I give people if they're giving a really high-stakes speech or keynote is to frame everything from a place of service. Many times we are so focused on what we want to say and everything around our side of the fence that we're not really thinking about how to serve the audience. So whether it's feeling extreme nerves, whether it's worrying about how we're going to be perceived, it means we've stepped away from the responsibility we have to serve the audience. So the more you connect to who they are and what they need, frame it from service, you'll do a better job.
No, that's wonderful. I want to thank you so much, Jill, for being on the show today. Our audience, our leaders and speakers alike who have tuned in to hear your pearls of wisdom will benefit greatly from hearing these tips for giving great speeches. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
And you'll stay on here in just a few minutes. We're going to be doing our Q&A, so you'll join us for that as well, right?
Yeah, can't wait.
Terrific. It's now time for the Leadership Voices Leadership Example. Our leadership example comes from HubSpot. Today's show is all about leaders, messaging, and storytelling, so we bring you the best storytellers in the world. Our next guest is Barbara Seymour Giordano. What do you do when the Great Recession hits and your freelance job as a global events producer disappears overnight? You guessed it, become a speechwriter and presentation coach. Barbara Giordano's love of story began when she worked as an assignment editor for CNN and E! Entertainment Television. She also moonlighted as an on-camera fashion and beauty spokesperson, appearing on popular talk shows nationwide. Talents combined, Barbara changed course and produced global sales meetings for Amgen, Cisco Systems, and Nike, just to name a few. When the recession hit, she reinvented herself as a story coach, first helping entrepreneurs craft 90-second investor pitches, and then coaching academic entrepreneurs on the art of delivering fund-worthy 10-minute pitches. In 2011, Barbara further honed her writing and presentation coaching skills when she began preparing speakers for the TED stage. Barbara loves collaborating with presenters to create captivating stories worth sharing. Please welcome Barbara Seymour Giordano. Barbara, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to share your thoughts and wisdom around speaking and coaching. And so maybe we can start off, maybe you could talk a little bit, share with our audience a little bit about your specialization.
Well, as a pitch coach and a speechwriter, as you know, I got into the business just kind of out of necessity, but I always had this dream of being a writer. And so my goal was, when I did work in the large-scale live events, the first thing that I did see was, while they spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on one event, producing one event, they would hire models, dancers, all professional, staging, lighting. Yeah, exactly. That's right. When you moonlight. And what would happen was Bob from accounting would get up to speak, and they hadn't invested in him. And that's when my love of story really began in terms of trying to help others. And so when the recession hit, and the first budget to be slashed were the live events, I jumped in and started doing writing. So because I really wanted to understand what the message was and how I could help further the executives on stage and any storyteller.
So really, you saw the need. You watched these brilliant people get up there and be big duds.
And suffer. My heart went out to them, right? Because they were up there having to follow professionals. It was a big deal. It was a painful place. But so for both of those, I started working on their stories. So I started out with the 90-second pitches, and from there I grew and learned how to really write stories that resonated.
No, that's great. So could you talk a little bit about what your approach or philosophy of writing speeches is? Share with our audience.
Yes. My philosophy, the reason I'm big on writing out the stories is because I feel like speeches or scripts are an emotional roadmap to the heart. So when we know where we're going in terms of story, the audience can follow along. Because frankly, once we feel, I say to my speakers all the time, okay, remember, emotions are in high demand and short supply. Mm-hmm. So if you feel what you're saying and you believe in what you're saying, then the audience will feel it too. And ultimately, they're going to forget what you said, but they're never going to forget how you made them feel.
And so where did you develop this philosophy? How did it emerge, and how did you realize that this is the message that you were going to be sharing with folks?
Well, it came out of necessity, really, because I volunteered the first time I started working with a group here called the Tech Coast Angels, and I volunteered and said, I can help write these 90-second talks. I had no idea how to, so I went to my best friend, the Magic 8-Ball online, and said, Google, help me. How do you write a 90-second pitch? And so I followed a format and then sort of fine-tuned it over time. And the same came when it came time to write speeches for TED Talks. I was like, how do I tell a story? And I Googled it and found a book called A Hero with a Thousand Faces. And it was what George Lucas based his story, Star Wars, on. And I thought, well, geez, if it's good enough for George Lucas, it's good enough for me. And I had volunteered also to do TED Talks. So those two, I learned a lot by volunteering, and I learned those techniques and brought them to the art of storytelling.
And so after you started helping all of these investors develop their pitches and they started getting funded, suddenly everybody said, we have to get to Barbara, we have to get Barbara to help us write these.
I tell the startups that I work with, I'm like, okay, we got to get them to write the check, those investors, and write it for more.
That's exactly. So if you were to give advice to somebody that was going to be giving a really big sales pitch, or if it's the same advice or different advice, if somebody was going to be giving a really important speech, what advice would you give that person?
To know the one thing that you want to leave the audience with. What is the one thing that you want them to ponder or act upon? And how does that make you feel? So if you believe in it, like I was saying before, especially with investors, but any audience, really that's my gift as a writer. I'm just the audience. And if it doesn't feel right, then we change it, right? Because the audience has a pretty good meter for phoniness. And so you got to be authentic up there, and you got to tell a story that you believe in. You can't just say it because it sounds good. You got to believe in it totally, because the audience will know when you're phoning it in or not being truthful.
Yeah, you have to be both transparent and authentic.
That's right.
That's wonderful. I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Barbara. You've graced our audience with some wonderful advice and tips. Thank you for joining us. And you're going to also stick around for our Q&A, which is coming up in just a few minutes.
Looking forward to it.
Terrific. Did you hear that? You know what that means? It's time for today's leadership lesson. Barbara, could you do me a great favor, and could you introduce today's very special faculty guest? Right into camera 2.
Okay. Are you ready to learn? Albert Einstein once said, if you can't explain it simply, then you don't understand it well enough. Every show, we bring you, our viewers, an opportunity to learn from a faculty expert with a simple but useful 3-minute leadership lesson. Today's leadership lesson is being delivered by Professor Jay Barbuto. Dr. Barbuto will discuss key factors to leadership excellence. Take it away, Dr. J.
I'm Jay Barbuto, and here is today's leadership lesson. Today I'll be talking about the two most important attributes of leadership excellence and the three alignments needed for these to happen. While most agree on the importance of leaders telling a compelling story and having great vision, there is more to this process. Today more than ever, leadership excellence requires us to be both transparent and authentic. To be transparent, leaders speak their minds while being consistent in their messaging. This transparency creates dedication and confidence that leaders are not just selling an idea, but passionately believe what they say. To be authentic, leaders must behave in ways that are consistent with their words. Their talk and walk must align. Actions speak louder than words, and this authenticity fosters trust. Remember, leaders, without trust, you have nothing. So how do leaders maintain transparency and authenticity? There are three alignments that make this happen. We call these the 3 C's for creating leadership excellence. The first is consciousness. What leaders think about and how they visualize success goes a long way towards realizing dreams. Great leaders spend considerable time thinking about what they stand for, what they want to achieve, and how best to make it happen. Leaders that see their success oftentimes can realize it. Leaders that visualize their success are most likely to realize it. The second dimension is conversation. What leaders say impacts their overall success. Our conversations tell the world what we stand for and what we hope to achieve. Great leaders talk openly about where things are today, what the vision is for the future, and what is needed both individually and collectively to make it happen. When leaders' consciousness and conversation are aligned, then they are transparent. This transparency is what gives others confidence in the leader. The third dimension of leadership excellence is conduct. What leaders do provides tangible messages to all about what really matters. People will believe leaders' actions ahead of their words. So it is essential that leaders never show discrepancies between their conversations and their conduct. When leaders' conversations and conduct are aligned, they are authentic. This authenticity establishes and maintains trust from others. Nothing makes others stop trusting leaders more quickly than when leaders say one thing but do another. So leaders, never let conduct contradict your conversations. So leaders, there we have it. Constructing leadership excellence is about being both transparent and authentic. And the 3 C's that must be aligned to foster transparency and authenticity are the leader's consciousness, conversation, and conduct. Make sure these 3 are always aligned, and your chances of experiencing leadership excellence and reaching all of your dreams will increase daily. I'm Jay Barbuto, and this has been your leadership lesson. Do you need some advice? Well, you've come to the right place. Every show we take questions from you, our viewers, and answer them right here on the show. Today we have 3 questions, and our guests have agreed to stay on and help us answer them. So thank you, Jay Golden, Joe Wesley, and Barbara Giordano. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our first question. Our first question is actually for Jay Golden, and it comes from Arturo in La Mirada, California. Arturo asks, when preparing stories for executives, do you tailor them to the audience and environment being presented, or does the story remain the same regardless of the audience?
Thank you. Well, I like to ask the people that I work with, I like to ask them 2 basic questions as related to this. The first one is, where are you? Meaning when you're going to go and give a speech, where are you? How are you feeling? What's up for you? What do you really want to say? What's going on? And the second question is, where are they? Where is the audience? What do they truly need? What are they truly looking for? And what's happening right now for them, as much as you know. And so when you think about tailoring your story, you definitely are going to want to tailor it in some way, whether that's delivering your message a little bit differently or taking the audience on a journey that more includes them, but one that really orients where you are and truly lands helping the audience with where they are and where they want to go.
Oh, wonderful. Other thoughts?
My approach to prepping any type of leader who's giving a presentation or a keynote is to approach things as if you have a camera. It's a camera lens. Once you've created your essential stories, that you are zooming in on certain elements and then panning back out. So once you've created those stories, then you run it through the filter of the audience. So I do audience-focused coaching, meaning you can create your essential assets in terms of your stories and your evidence, but everything needs to be compared to what is the audience, what are their primary concerns, what do they care about, and then you make your story match their particular needs.
Terrific.
And for me, because I am the audience and I'm the first filter that it goes through, I'm really focusing on our common humanity. So in terms of story, one of the things I learned at CNN, one of the most important things was finding a local story that has national and international relevance. And once you do that, you put that into the story, then that helps the audience relate to it because they live through your story. They don't hear what happened to you, they think about what happened to them in terms of that story.
Yeah. So across the board, do we customize our stories for the audience? It's unequivocally yes.
Absolutely.
For sure. So our second question is for Jill Wesley, and it comes from Jeremy in Placentia, California. Jeremy asks, how do you prepare a non-charismatic person to act charismatically in their speech?
A big mistake that occurs when it comes to coaching people to speak is requiring them to act as if they're someone else. I believe everybody actually does have charisma, and I create what I call a charisma continuum. And what happens is often people will try and gauge and assess their own ability and compare it to someone who is a professional speaker or motivational speaker. I work with people that have content expertise and leadership expertise. So they're only technically competing with themselves. So my responsibility to them is to help them understand that they do have charisma. We create touch points within their story where they can come alive. And I always ask them to think about if they were talking about this topic, sitting across the table from a friend at a dinner party, they don't seem dead when they talk. They sound normal, and that's what I'm looking for them to do on stage.
Oh, wonderful. Barbara?
And I agree with all of that. I'm going to add just a little bit more. I also work hard to have my speakers be more in the moment, because when they're in the moment and they remember what it was like to discover whatever they're talking about and to re-engage with it in a new way, because oftentimes we just repeat, and stories are organic. They shift all the time. So it's really important to be more in the moment and feel those feelings.
Oh, terrific.
For me, it's a big part about finding the right story to deliver that critical message. And in that's very, very personal. So someone might stand up and seem uncharismatic when they're speaking in front of an audience on a topic that's very data-driven. But if they can speak about a story of something that happened to them, and if I can help them come back to that place and reorient to it again and find what's alive in it, then you bring that aliveness to that speaker, and then they find that charisma inside of that moment.
Oh, wonderful. So some great tips. If any of you don't have that natural charisma flowing through your veins, here's some great tips that you can follow. Our third question is for Barbara Seymour Giordano, and it comes from Chris in Fullerton, California. Chris asks, I know every story is unique, and my story is unique. But what is it that makes my story worth telling and remembering?
Everyone's story is unique. It's like our thumbprints, right? And what makes it a great story worth remembering is the ability to tell that story with a message that's relevant to you. And again, it speaks to our common humanity, all of the things that we relate to as human beings, but then also that ability to share the struggle. To say, hey, I failed here. I fell off my high horse, and here's what happened. Again, because the audience lives through you. And when you can tell a story where you can be vulnerable, your audience is going to remember it because they'll remember how you made them feel.
That's great.
I believe that we have not just one story, but many stories. And part of the job is to find this constellation of stories and to be able to draw from it. And so when you're telling your story, that is the one that is made up of these many stories, these many critical insights and lessons. It is actually, sometimes it's actually sometimes it's helping people to drop, as Joseph Campbell said, to drop into the innermost cave, to go into a deep place that shows some of that vulnerability. You don't always have to show that to the audience, but when you're preparing for your story, to orient to those profound moments, that's absolutely critical in transforming your audiences.
Terrific.
I agree with both of you. Great information. Our stories and our experiences are unique, but there's a common thread through humanity that we all share. So when a lot of times people have what I call story envy. They'll hear someone else's really great story and they're like, oh, I don't have. Everybody has. I mean, you look through chapters in your life, people have wonderfully fascinating stories within them. And I may not have lived the same experience as someone else, but the lessons and the emotions and the exchanges and interactions that people have are relatable. So that's what really matters.
So they might just need to take some time to really think about their lives and think about the different experiences that they've had to start accessing those moments and accessing those stories that are memorable and tellable and retellable.
And sometimes you actually just have to practice. You have to push your edge and try something that feels a little bit uncomfortable. And maybe you don't tell that in front of 100 or 1,000 people. Maybe you tell that at lunch.
That's a great point. Absolutely.
No, that's great. I want to thank you guys for joining us on the show today. You've really shared years and years of wisdom and knowledge for our viewers at home. This has been the Leadership Voices Q&A. If you have a question or need advice, having leadership challenges at work and need some expertise and insights, send us your questions here to the Leadership Voice by email leadershipvoice@fullerton.edu or contact us by Twitter @CSUF_leadership. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today's show. Today we explored ways that leaders can improve their public speaking. Thank you to Jay Golden, Jill Wesley, and Barbara Seymour Giordano. It was a pleasure to deliver today's leadership lesson. Join us each episode of The Leadership Voice as we will have more executive guests, another leadership lesson, and lots more worth tuning in to see. I'm Jay Barbuto, and on behalf of the Center for Leadership, we'll see you next time right here on The Leadership Voice.